When former FBI Director James Comey confirmed yesterday that Donald Trump politely asked him to drop the investigation into possible false statements by former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, saying, "I hope you can let this go," many liberals began to scream that this proved Trump was guilty of obstruction of justice. CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin was especially clear in his belief, saying, "If this isn't obstruction of justice, I don't know what is." And then following that up on Twitter by saying he really meant it, you guys. But is it true that Comey's testimony establishes that Trump is guilty of obstruction of justice? Here are just the facts. Now, obstruction of justice does not apply anytime someone attempts to influence any sort of investigation in a way that liberals don't like. It's a federal crime that is actually clearly defined by federal statutes. Now, there are a number of ways that you can be guilty of obstruction of justice according to the United States Code, including killing or intimidating a witness, destruction of evidence, or intimidating a juror or a grand juror. But none of those apply here. The only possible way Trump could have obstructed justice by his conversation with Comey is by interfering with department proceedings or interfering with a criminal investigation. Now, interfering with department proceedings is codified under Section 1505 of Chapter 18 of the United States Code, which says, "Whoever corruptly or by threats of force or by any threatening letter or communication influences, obstructs, or impedes the due and proper administration of the law is guilty of obstruction of justice." Now notice the highlighted part here. Corruption, which is defined by the case law as bribery, threats of force, or intimidation are necessary elements of the obstruction of justice crime. Now, the statute that defines the obstruction of justice with respect to a criminal investigation, Section 1510, is even clearer that bribery is a necessary element of the crime. So to recap, if Trump had offered James Comey $1 million to drop the investigation into Flynn, that would be obstruction of justice. If Trump had threatened to kill James Comey if he didn't drop the investigation into Flynn, that would be obstruction of justice. If Trump had said, "Drop the investigation into Flynn or you're fired," that's at least closer to obstruction of justice, although prosecuting him on that basis would present a constitutional problem, because under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is responsible for the execution of federal law, which means that determining which criminal investigations go forward and which don't is actually part of his constitutional responsibilities. Now, case law is clear that any person can ask an investigator or a prosecutor to drop an investigation as long as they don't use bribery, threats, intimidation, or force to do so, which is exactly what the statute says. Now, to put this in a way that maybe liberals can understand, when Bill Clinton snuck onto a plane to chat with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch while his wife was under investigation by the Department of Justice, that might have been unethical or improper, and it certainly was, but it wasn't a crime unless Clinton threatened, blackmailed, or bribed Lynch during the course of their conversation. Now, likewise, Comey was clear in his statement that no blackmail, bribery, threats, or intimidation occurred during his conversation with Trump. So there is no obstruction of justice here, and liberals who are saying differently ought to actually bother to read the statutes that define obstruction of justice before making these reckless claims. Now, we don't know what information might come out in the future, and it might turn out that Trump did other things that we don't know about yet that might constitute obstruction of justice. And you might think that the president asking the director of the FBI to drop an investigation is improper. Comey certainly did, but improper does not mean criminal. And politely asking Comey to drop the investigation clearly did not rise to the level of a crime.